Welcome to the Pinelander podcast, the official podcast of Pineland, broadcasting to you from an undisclosed location deep inside Pineland, where we discuss faith, family, finances, firearms, freedom, food, and everything else in between, with those who believe in living free and living out the values that made this country free. All right, welcome to the Pineland podcast. My name is Paul LaFavor. I'm here with my ranger buddy, Mike Blackburn. Today is Friday, the 31st of March, 2023. And you know, I never get tired of that intro. I love the Revolutionary War sounds and the patriotic fervor of it. Really gets my nads pumping. And you know, what also gets our nads pumping is a lot of the snafus we're seeing out there in the economy, you know, with bank this, that, or other going down, a lot of the debacles we are hearing about. And, you know, despite what the president said, he said that Americans can rest assured that our banking system is safe. But I'm not sure if that's completely accurate. You know, today we have back by popular demand, NC Scout. I want to welcome you today, NC Scout, for maybe talking about this and anything else we come across.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be back.
Yes, sir. It's always great to have you.
Always.
So anyway, we got SVB Bank. Of course, that's that's the one that everybody. That's maybe the first one that kind of that popped up. But of course, now we're learning that there's a lot of other banks that are
coming to a neighborhood near you
in similar dire circumstances. So I thought it'd be helpful today because there's a lot of anxiety out there where people are trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with my money? Okay, we all need banking. We use banking for everything: pay our bills, pay our mortgages, pay payroll if you have employees that work for you. Where do I put my money that where it's going to be safe? Okay, so I can get my bills, feed my family, what have you. And today that's causing a lot of issues because people are trying to figure out, they're scratching their head, trying to figure out, where does safe exist? And, we all remember the stories of back in the Great Depression, where people used to keep their money in jars, buried out in the backyard or stuffed in between the mattress and the box springs. And I remember growing up, there was still quite a few older people. I mean, I was school age, but I remember neighbors in their 80s that still didn't trust banks, just from what they, recalled and remembered from when they were growing up during the Great Depression. So I thought what we may start out with is just sort of hitting some of the definitions, some of the nomenclature, so at least we kind of know what we're talking about as far as how some of these terms that you may or may not be familiar with. The first thing I want to talk about, of course, is money. Okay, we throw that term around a lot, and I think a definition for money would be useful. So it's important to, I think, remember that up until about 1500 BC, money was alive. Okay, generally we were talking about cattle or goats or things like that. So these were sort of the things that were used that had value that you could barter and trade with, and they had an intrinsic value of themselves. Okay. Later, of course, we started getting gold coins. We started getting silver coins. We started getting things that were distinguished from paper currency checks and drafts. Okay, just real types of items that had sort of a store of value in them. Now, today we use what's known as, commonly referred to as, Federal Reserve notes. Okay, is currency. Now, currency is not money. So I think a lot of people confuse the two. A currency is basically a money substitute. So it's a good way to look at it is, let's just say money is gold coins. Well, instead of you walking around with a big pocket of gold coins, which is quite heavy and quite a bit of value, you could go and deposit your money into a local bank, and they would give you currency. They would give you sort of a receipt for that gold, and you could use that currency and give it to other people, and they could go and redeem that for the gold or the silver that was back at the bank. So it's sort of a convenience thing. You could carry the much lighter weight paper rather than the heavy money of value. Now, today we use what's known as Federal Reserve notes. Okay, now these are not money, even though we call it money. Basically, a Federal Reserve note today is a fiat currency. Okay, it's a debt note that's basically backed by nothing. Okay, you may have heard your grandparents or whatever talking about gold certificates, or on the bottom of the dollar, you may see some of these old dollars from way back where it says, you could redeem them, okay, for silver or whatever when we had the silver certificates. You'll notice on our dollar bills today, of the Federal Reserve notes, none of that verbiage exists anymore. Okay, so the Federal Reserve notes are issued by the Federal Reserve Bank, and that is a privately owned corporation. It is not a part of the government, and it has shareholders. It's a corporation with shareholders, and many of these shareholders are foreigners. They're not even American. So that's kind of just important to know. I think a lot of people think of the Federal Reserve Bank as a part of the government, and it is not. The FRNs, the Federal Reserve notes, are unsigned checks written on a closed account, and are basically promissory notes to pay the U.S. Treasury. Okay, notes to pay U.S. Treasuries. So the government issues out treasuries, and we exchange FRNs as a promissory note to pay those treasury bills. That's kind of how it works. It's sort of a debt-based system. It's a promise to pay the debt to the Federal Reserve Bank, to that private corporation. And if you're kind of listening now, you can kind of see the crux of the problem that we're currently in right now. Okay, you may be starting to think, okay, this is starting to make a little sense here, because what we're dealing with is a lot of paper that is tied to a debt, and that's kind of important to understand. Now, the dollar is a measure of weight defined by the Coinage Act, and it used to be 1/20th of an ounce of gold. Back in 1934, that was devalued to 1/35th of an ounce. Okay, but a dollar actually, even though we call, how many dollars do you have, a dollar is actually a measure of weight, as its correct definition. Now, wealth is land, tools, materials, equipment, and anything that generates a profit, any kind of profit generating asset. So a lot of times, we'll take our currency and we'll actually go purchase wealth, things that we can actually make money with. Maybe it's real estate. Maybe you're going to rent your house out. That's a generating, that is an asset that generates profit. The other thing that you should be familiar with is a thing referred to as fractional reserve banking. Fractional reserve banking is a system whereby a bank only has to retain 3% of deposits. So if you and I go down to our bank, and this is the problem that we're seeing now, if we go down to our local bank and we make a $1,000 deposit into our account, what that does for that bank is it creates an instant credit of $33,333 for the bank, because they are allowed to loan that much money off of that amount of money. Now, this is, you can kind of see right now that that's the problem, okay? Really, the problem that we are having is a debt system with a fractional reserve banking system that works off of generating even more and more debt. And now we're starting to get a problem. That's why you hear on the news all the time, as long as you don't go down to the bank and withdraw your money, then your bank is fine. I want you to think about that a minute. As long as you don't go and get your own money, the bank will be fine. Well, of course it will be, okay? because they only have 3% of what you gave them anyway. Now, if everybody goes and takes out their 100%, they're in a big problem. They have a big problem, okay? Because that's why they run into a liquidity problem, okay? Because they have to go print more money, okay? More debt instruments, not actually true money. So the other thing to keep in mind is it is not possible to pay off the national debt with Federal Reserve notes. I think you need to understand that. So when we talk about the national debt, and I'm not sure where it's at now.
A lot.
30 trillion. I mean, whatever the number is. Let's just say it's 30 trillion. Well, in somebody's mind, you would think, well, can't they just print off $30 trillion? Okay, and just go pay that off. Well, no, you can't, because I've already told you that a Federal Reserve note is not money. It is a debt instrument, and you cannot pay off a debt with a debt note. Okay, basically what FRNs do is they just transfer debt around. It doesn't actually pay off the debt. It would take money to actually pay off the national debt. Now, I've heard some people talk about, well, ANWR. Okay, if we open up ANWR, there may be enough oil up in ANWR alone to pay off the national debt. So some people say, hey, this is not a big deal. We still have enough assets and things that are actually worth something that we could easily pay off the national debt. And that could very well be, but not continuing in the same path that we are currently on. And with that, I want to go ahead and stop talking and bring in C Scout, because he's kind of our. We brought you in for a reason. You've been looking at this too, and you've had some interesting conversations with folks that are in the business, in the banking business. And what are they telling you?
Well, first of all, just as a lead-in, you're exactly right, top to bottom. And that's a sober analysis that people really need to take to heart. And the biggest one is Jefferson, his quotes, Thomas Jefferson's quotes going into the pre-Constitution era and then just after the Constitution, with the whole conversation regarding federalism, anti-federalism, and much of it had to do with the establishment of central banking. Which would be an argument that he'd end up losing, unfortunately. And I think that that's why among the left, with regard to the founding fathers, that Hamilton is much more well regarded, at least in American terms, with the American left. And of course, we know this from the Broadway musical and so on and so forth, and a lot of the revisionist history that's out there. But Hamilton brought us centralized banking to the United States. And that's a point that cannot be overlooked. And the Federal Reserve, being a private corporation that has shareholders, that has heavy foreign investment in it as well, that is a child of that system. And, the creature from Jekyll Island is another very good reference on this. And 100% of it is true. A lot of these things, both written from the left wing and the right wing perspective throughout history regarding central banking, a lot of it's been dismissed as conspiracy theory or tinfoil hat or not feasible. But now we begin to revisit a lot of the points that were made in those pieces, and we see that they were absolutely correct. For me, I have a lot of clientele who are usually fairly wealthy, and are usually at a stable station in life, of a professional class, and have assets that they want to protect, or in some cases are in the asset protection business with regards to finances. And so I get kind of the 1,000 foot view of what they're looking at, and in some cases, what they see as causal factors for a lot of this. And they're like-minded individuals, you know, obviously very pro-liberty, um, you know, very, very dedicated to their own training, and you know, staying engaged with as much of this in the community as possible. And so, um, you know, several of them work in banking industry, and I have a few close friends who've been regular clients of mine who are executives in the banking industry in smaller banks. And that is an important point of view going forward in this conversation, because that is the fundamental question right now. Um, you know, we've probably all heard the pundits. A lot's been going on the past 7 days with, you know, the whole Silicon Valley Bank implosion and the resulting fallout with all of that. And the question that a lot of people have is what's going to happen to my smaller local banks? Because if you're like me, you would rather deal with the bank that you can walk in, you can talk to the bank president, or at least someone who is in a managerial capacity that's close to the hierarchy of that bank. And you can at least get a feel for, you know, is this a well run place of business? Do they actually care about their customers? How long have they been in operation? Um, you can get a more direct feel for all that versus Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Chase Bank or J.P. Morgan or any of these, right? And you know, the conversation keeps coming up just like it did in 2008 about too big to fail, right? These giant banks are too big to fail. They're too big to fail. We're going to bail these out, right? And that really leaves the fundamental question of smaller banks. And it was the smaller banks in the Great Depression that actually suffered the most. And that was the reason that the FDIC was created, was a promissory act and a surety created by the United States government, saying that the banking system is safe and that you are safe to invest your money in any declared bank in the United States, right? Except that the best of intentions always pave the way to hell. And we didn't really update that. And we never really thought since the Great Depression era, which, you know, some historians and some economists say we never truly got out of, because we just continued to float that war debt along after the World War II era was concluded. But the greater point here is that the United States government wants you to believe that the banking industry in totes is safe. And the short answer to that is that no, it's not. Um, you know, if we lived in a purely capitalist society, right, and everything was perfect and it was a perfect world, banks would come and go all the time. They would fail. They would be allowed to fail because not every business is run properly. Not every business is run correctly. And businesses that have bad practices need to go away. This is a type of natural selection, right? But we, in this slow slide towards socialization and centralization, and that second statement is very, very important here, of banking control, we've really given way to not allowing the bad sectors of our own economy to go by the wayside. And in the worst cases, we've actually incentivized that failure. SVB going under should be allowed to go under because it needs to be understood that, first of all, the elephant in the room is that the people that stood to lose the most from SVB are the same pink and blue haired people on the left that absolutely despise us, that fund the Democrat machine, that want socialism in America. These quote unquote venture capitalists, venture startup companies in the tech sector, that's exactly what they do. Um, the other thing is that just because you're a venture capitalist, quote unquote, that means that this entails a high amount of risk, right? There's a lot of risk that is involved here. And when your risk, which is overwritten through the interest rate, if you have a high risk loan that you're granting to someone, you increase that interest rate. It's just like, at Fort Bragg, if we can still call it Fort Bragg, uh, if they'll let us.
For a little while longer.
When Joe was at Fort Bragg, and we had to, I'm sure you guys did too. I had to write counseling statements. Hey, don't go buy a car from these dealerships because they're trying to scalp loans on you. The car is overpriced and you can't afford a 30% interest rate, right? But that's because they know that those are high risk loans. It's the same with every other kind of loan, right? And SVB operated on this principle that we're just going to give money to anybody who says they're a startup in the tech industry, and they end up losing their money. Well, now what they want is for us to subsidize those losses.
The risk.
Say that's okay.
They want the risk subsidized. Yeah.
Exactly. They need to be responsible for their own losses, and they need to be accountable for that. For their employees, hey, that's the risk that you take. I have employees too. And if I make bad personal decisions and I make bad decisions for my business and my business goes under, then they're the ones that have to suffer with that, along with myself included. Right. So SVB going under and the FDIC wants us to subsidize that. The Federal Depository Insurance Corporation, which is run by the United States government. It's a semi-public enterprise, which the banking industry pays a certain amount of money into to insure their own bank accounts in case of bank failure. That was the way that this whole system was set up. But we've got so far away from that because we've gotten into this comfort zone where, everything is everything's going to be fine. And we have the too big to fail banks, and we have Bank of America that took on the bad assets of Merrill Lynch, and we have Wells Fargo that was the center of the subprime lending problems and one of the causal factors of the 2008 meltdown. We have the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which occurred in the Clinton administration, which gave way to the ability for these banks to buy up the bad brokerage houses on Wall Street, and this was a way for them to leverage their own debt, right? And so there's a lot of intersecting factors that we never actually resolved economically that have resurfaced over and over again, and we continue to just kick the can down the road. This has been made much more problematic by the PPP loans, the COVID money. And of course, the Trump administration began this. This was a program that was perpetuated further by the Biden administration. And this is really what brought us to today. Now, there were a lot of financial guys in the alternative media out there that, are frequently featured on Zero Hedge. One of them is Jim Quinn, who runs the Burning Platform that I occasionally write pieces for. And he writes and contributes to American Partisan as well. And he is a very well-regarded financial advisor that has been featured on Zero Hedge continuously. Really, really intelligent guy. And PPP loans, he was saying 2 years ago that when the velocity factor of this money, right, that is going into the economy, literally money for nothing, we're paying each person in America, $1,000, and in some cases much more, to sit at home. to not do anything. And it was at least intended by, we'll be kind and call them socialists in our own government, Keynesian economists, right? The bottom up economists, or rather the top down management model, that we're going to give you money, you'll sit at home, but you'll eventually return to the labor force. And that's not the case. That hasn't been the case. That's why we see material shortages. That's why we see manufacturing shortages. That's why we're seeing delays in shipping times. That's why we're seeing help wanted signs everywhere. That's why we're seeing people saying, hey, I'm not coming back to work if you don't pay me at least $15 an hour. Because everything is being government subsidized. And so the velocity factor of the money that was injected into the American economy is now finally catching up with us. This is intersecting with another problem, the bond market. So banks make money off of interest that is sold as part of loans. The mortgage industry is probably best known for this because they have fixed interest rates. If you have a fairly secure loan, you're going to have a fixed interest rate. If you're a more risky loan, you're going to qualify for a variable interest rate, which is something you never want when you're buying a home. But people aren't buying as many homes now. And so banks made their money off of that. But the other way that they make their money is off of the bond market. And so buying and selling bonds, corporate bonds, governmental bonds, bank bonds, this is how they make their money. And the bond market has been in a lot of trouble for some time now. This is the thing that a lot of people don't really want to talk about. A lot of bankers don't want to address this. And the quote unquote too big to fail banks are the ones who are beginning to suffer the worst from this, right? So this is beginning to catch up. The FTX scandal with Sam Brinkman-Fried, and he had his whole operation that hinged on Bitcoin, and there were a lot of Democrats that were tied up in that. There were some professional athletes who were tied up in that as well, most notably Tom Brady. You can't have that much money disappear from the overnight collapse of a brokerage house and not expect a serious fallout effect. And it's a bit of a delayed fallout effect, but SVB was heavily tied up in FTX, right? And so FTX collapses. The bond market is in trouble. SVB wasn't able to cover their bad loans, stuff that with so many people in the tech industry had invested in FTX, and it's all now beginning to catch up. The problem is that SVB had sold loans and bought bonds from many other companies in California, Utah, Nevada, Idaho, even Oregon, and Washington. They have a regional banking system. In California, this is something that won't necessarily make the news because it's politically unpopular to talk about it in certain circles. But California repealed the banking laws that they have on their own system, their own banking regulations that would have prevented this. They don't want to talk about this because they're positioning Gavin Newsom to run for president. They don't want to discuss these things. But this is exactly what happened. This isn't to absolve Republicans, by the way. We already had a storm, a very serious one that was brewing, but they went and made it worse. They went and made it substantially worse.
It really just kicked the can down the road. I mean, this thing, some people could say the fix to 2008 is leading us directly to where we're at today in 2023.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Because we never got away from the debt model that you pointed out as a lead into the show. You never fix the problem if you don't first address what caused the problem. And debt, the model of debt, because there is a lot of money to be made off of debt if you're in the banking industry, and this is how they make their money. And with that said, a lot of Americans never figured out that you need to get away from credit cards. Credit cards are going to be the next thing that goes because with COVID, The average credit card debt in the American household went up significantly. There's a wide variety of reports out there. U.S. Consumer News Reports puts out one number. The CBO puts out another number, but the average is high. The average credit card debt of each American household per capita is fairly high. And at worst, we have families that are out there that are completely living off credit cards to get from one paycheck to the next.
See,
This is a very dangerous thing.
I think the now you tell me if I'm wrong here, but this is the way I'm kind of looking at this entire banking industry. When I was 16 years old, I went down to my local bank. I lived in a small little town, Leeton, Missouri. Okay, probably population 500 or something. Went down to the Bank of Leeton, and everyone knew the bank president. Everyone knew who worked there. I opened up a checking account with some money that I had made. And the bank president himself sat down with me and helped me open the bank account, and then, of course, gave me a lecture on being responsible. And how he decided to run his bank was completely up to his discretion. Best practices, okay? Today, these small, local, regional banks are not really set up like this anymore. And like you said, if my local bank of Leeton, where I started out at 16 years old, if that bank president was doing something unscrupulous, he wasn't going to last long. But that was something that he had a vested interest in because he was a part of the community. He knew people in the community, and he felt accountable to the community to do the right thing with the deposits. Today, everything's getting pushed to the big boys, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank Corp. I mean, you can go on and on. And they're really being controlled and directed by the Federal Reserve System. So you're not safe at the regional banks. I think I heard Janet Yellen in an exchange with Senator Lankford was talking about the fact that when he was asking her, who gets bailed out, who doesn't, it was almost kind of like this. Well, we kind of just sit around the room and we discuss it, and I make a phone call to the White House, and if we feel the bank is worthy, we'll bail them out. Well, that the Bank of Leeton is not going to be a priority for the Federal Reserve. They're going to be worrying about the big boys. And that's really, what she told Senator Lankford was, if you're in a small bank, you're just on your own.
Right.
So what does the guy do? What does the guy do now?
So the thing that doesn't often get discussed, and I'll address that for sure, is there is a strategy going on by the Federal Reserve to bring in central bank digital currency, or CBDC. This is part of the Great Reset. It's a stated goal. This isn't, tinfoil hat, Alex Jones, kind of off in existing in the more conspiratorial spaces. This is real. This is by their own words. This is what they want, because they have total control when they do that. And the Great Reset is literally ushering this in. When they say you'll own nothing and be happy, they have to get rid of the regional banks. Fortunately, there is a system, though, and there's a strategy of pushback against this, which doesn't often get talked about outside of banking circles. And I asked a close friend of mine who's a banking executive, and he's had many classes with me. extremely squared away guy, and very, very savvy when it comes to finances. And we had a conversation once after class, not that long ago, where we were talking about ESGs and DEI and how the small banking industry is trying to push back against that. And we had that conversation again. We revisited that in the last conversation I had with him, and it's hinged on the IntraFi system. So this was something that I had never heard of before until talking to him. The IntraFi system is essentially a means that banks insure one another over a region. So when you have a network of smaller banks, they insure one another, and this is a way that they insure themselves against large scale bank takeovers. So let's say if Bank of America, which is not financially sound, Bank of America is not of all the large banks, Bank of America is probably the weakest. If Bank of America came in and said, say, we'll make up a fictitious bank and we'll just say the Bank of Central North Carolina. And they said, hey, we're going to take this bank over. We're going to buy it all out. If the IntraFi system looked into their call reports through the FDIC, if those adherents to the IntraFi system did that and said, this seems like a bad idea, we're not going for it, they could put the brakes on. They could. This is how bank buyouts actually begin. Is they look at the call reports and say, can we do this? Can we not do this? Are we going to work with this bank? Are we not going to work with this bank? And this was a way internally that banks were able to, at the small scale level, compete with the larger banks, and they could offer services to their clientele that some of the larger banks maybe wouldn't have an incentive to do because they don't necessarily have to, for lack of putting it a better way. And so I think that when it comes to big business and when it comes to the banking industry, that the local banks are going to utilize this to try and fight back against the larger corporate takeovers. Now, will it work? I don't know. Because I'm not well versed enough personally to know the ins and outs of that. But I can tell you this, that there is a concerted effort to push back. A lot of these bankers at the local level, they live for their clientele because they are part and parcel of the communities of their clientele, and they stand the most to lose.
We all love our local regional banks. I mean, there's this huge difference going into the lobby of one of the small community bank and going into the Bank of America, for instance. Okay, I mean, there's a huge difference in how you're treated and everything else. There's sort of a corporate mentality in those big banks. They really don't care anything about you. They don't care about what your issues are. And talking to anybody that can make a decision is almost impossible.
Now, what I will say is that because for every move there's a counter move, and when the small local banks try to push back against CBDC, the way that the Fed would push back against them is simply raising interest rates, because it's been widely acknowledged that the interest rates have been way too low for too long. They have doled out cheap money, and the banks that can absorb the losses of a higher interest rate are the too big to fail banks.
That's right.
It would be a backdoor way of bailing them out based on their own liquidity, because just by their size, they can keep much more liquidity on hand. The smaller banks wouldn't necessarily be able to do that, and they would begin to fail. And they would begin to be put in a position where the Fed could step in and go to Congress and say, look, what we'll do is we'll give a tax incentive to the large banks to buy up the smaller banks, which are beginning to fail. We may very well see that. I pray that we don't, but that would be the strategy by which they would use. Rather than go in a full-scale socialist model of nationalizing the banking industry, I don't see that happening. because the corporate interests at the very top, at the very most elite level, they don't want to see the banks necessarily get nationalized because that would end up hurting them. That would hurt everybody, but that would hurt them. That would also hurt the United States government. Instead, they want their competitors at the local most levels to be put out of business. What I did, because I had a substantial number of assets in other banks that were larger banks. And I did that as a hedge against this very thing. I started paying attention to this stuff in 2008. I had deployment money, back when you have year on, year off cycles where you're gone for a year, you come back for a year,
Right.
and you come back with a big bank account. And I was putting money in different banks, some big, some small, as a hedge in case, because we knew that
not sticking all your eggs in just one basket. You're kind of spreading it around.
Right. We knew at some point there was going to be a 2008, leading up to 2008. That was, and I've been a follower of Ron Paul for a very long time. Long before I was in the Army, paid attention to a lot of his talking points, and paid attention to this stuff and saw the writing on the wall. But in later years, in the past decade, I began to pay attention to what the big banks were really doing, and some of these toxic practices. I took all of my money out and put it all in smaller banks, in local banks, as a means of, I not that I have a whole lot, but I'm doing my part in saying, hey, I'm going to support my local economy, and that bolsters the bargaining power of my local bank against big bank takeover.
Okay,
and
so there's
money in a local
so
economy.
that's a good strategy right there. Resist the large, too big to fail banks. Bank locally, and as a hedge against an SVB, if you will, have a couple of different smaller local banks. And a lot of times for those folks out there that may have like a small business, let's say you have a small business on the side, they always tell you anyway, it's best to have a separate account set up for your business anyway. So, a lot of times this is not going to be even much of a headache for you because you maybe already have one or two accounts anyway going.
Right. That's my first strategy, is diversification at the local most level. The second thing that I do, and I want to make something very clear. I'm not giving financial advice because I am hardly a financial advisor. I'm just a guy who runs a business.
Hey man, we're just a bunch of Pinelanders here trying to freaking keep whatever few, what little currency we have, we just want to hold on to it, okay?
Right.
I want to lose my Don. Get my Don intact.
That's right. Yeah, don't need to be losing your Don, man.
I got to give that disclaimer, but what I can do is tell you what I do.
Yeah, that's what we want to know. We want to know what little guys like you and me and Paul are doing, because that's the majority of us are in this pool.
I take 10% of my income, roughly 10%. Sometimes a little more if I can afford it. Sometimes a little bit less, just depends. And I put it in precious metals. That's and as a strategy of precious metals. So there's two ways to look at it. When we talk about precious metals, I'm exclusively talking about gold and silver, platinum, palladium, and so on and so forth. I kind of stay away from those because there's too much fluctuation in that market. Platinum, I think, is seriously overvalued. Palladium as well. And the other thing is that they can be confused for silver frequently for somebody with an untrained eye. If they see a platinum silver eagle, for example, they may confuse it for a silver eagle. And American eagle, rather. I said silver eagle, but an American eagle, they make them with platinum. Several mintages out there, private mints, make that design in platinum, and it looks like silver if you didn't know what you were looking at. So I stick to gold and silver so that there's no confusion out there. And here's how I do it. This is my investment strategy in that. So we buy precious metals really for three reasons. All right. The first is to have raw bullion. All right. We have raw bullion, and all the gold commercials and whatever, they say it's a hedge against inflation and everything. Well, let me explain how that works. So gold today is worth, by the time this episode airs, who knows? But as of today, it's worth a little over $1,900, right? And silver is going for right around $21 an ounce, and those prices are per ounce, right? But that doesn't mean that 6 months from now, a year from now, um, it's going to be worth substantially more. We don't know, right? We're not aware of what it's going to be worth later down the road. So we know what it is worth today. And since we are realistically at a 30% inflation rate, our money is devaluing at a rate of 30%. And if you go to the grocery store, you see that. So if we invest our currency, which is losing 30% of its value on a regular basis, then we will be able to put our money into something that is not just going to gain value, but it will maintain its value against the U.S. dollar going forward. That's a way to protect yourself.
There's another way to look at this, which I think we need to remind everybody. So basically what you're doing is you're taking a Federal Reserve note, okay, which is a debt note, and you're exchanging it for money, real money. And that's key. I want, because you got to understand that debt note is going to continue to depreciate. It's going to continue to be devalued, whereas your money, okay, the gold bullion or whatever, silver bullion, whichever, these things are historically considered money for millennia. They're not going anywhere. You're going to maintain your value in that money, in that form of money. So that's really smart for a couple of reasons. Number one, the other thing you have to understand is that the price of gold. I don't really like using that, because you got to understand, you're basically saying how many FRNs, how many Federal Reserve notes do you have to give up in order to get an ounce of gold?
Right.
And that's really not the way to look at it. An ounce of gold is worth what an ounce of gold is worth, regardless of when. The debt notes are going to fluctuate greatly. So people talk about things becoming more expensive. In reality, they probably aren't. It's just that your debt note is becoming less and less valuable. So it takes much more of them.
Right. That's exactly right. So the other two ways that people invest in precious metals and reasons for that, is buying rare and antique coins, which have a numismatic value on them, as well as a precious metal value to it based on its weight. This is the worst way to invest in precious metals.
I think so too.
I steer people away from that generally. Buying rare coins is good really for the only reasons I can think of off the top of my head.
It's like dealing in art.
Right. Yeah. It is a liquid asset, because you can take rare coins into any coin shop, and the dealer there is going to generally recognize what it is and its purity, versus random just raw bullion from, say, like Sunshine Net, for example, who I deal with fairly regularly.
So you can, what you're saying is, like, you can look at a Krugerrand, you can look at an American Eagle, you can look at a Canadian Maple Leaf. Even though, each of these come in 1 ounce coins, they're going to have a different value.
Right.
I generally look for, and you probably do the same thing, I generally look for a coin that's easily recognizable and is not going to be something that someone's going to scratch their head and wonder what it is.
Right.
But I try to get a coin that is less expensive. You're going to pay a little more for an Eagle. You probably pay a little more for a Krugerrand. But generally speaking, a Canadian Maple is going to cost you a little less.
Right. Well, and I'll say on the Krugerrands, I just bought a large amount of Krugerrands because right now they are actually the lowest in value of the current production ones, and I'm not sure why this is, but they are the lowest in cost on the market right now in comparison to the spot price, which
But
is the price
yeah,
of
but you're
what.
absolutely right. Shop around. An ounce of gold
Yep,
is not necessarily an ounce of gold.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And the same is true for silver. And it's having a large number of silver, having a large amount of silver rather, having a large amount of gold, or as much as you can afford. And people will look at the spot price and say, well, these are kind of expensive, and I don't know if I can justify it. And they really don't want to part ways with the security of the liquidity of their cash. And a lot of people who are just getting into investing in precious metals think like that. The thing is that precious metals, at least for me, are liquid assets. They are divisible assets, and they are fairly easy to use. There's a lot of places that recognize precious metals as money, as valid money, a lot more places than most people would care to realize in their day-to-day lives. Um, it all starts with a question. Now, the last thing, and this is a product that listeners may or may not be aware of, but I think that it is probably the best thing to hit the precious metals market in maybe ever, and it's a product of modern manufacturing technology. And I want to state very clearly, I have absolutely no financial interest or connection with them. I did, however, do a podcast with the owner of this company, and that's Goldback. And the owner and CEO of the company came on to my podcast, did just over an hour. We discussed monetary theory and this product, why he created this product, and it is one that I use regularly and allow people to pay me for training in. That is the Goldback. And what a goldback is a fractional amount of gold that is pressed out into a bill. And so one goldback is 1/1000th of an ounce of gold. To me, that resolves the fundamental question that a lot of people have, actually two questions that a lot of people have regarding gold specifically. First is, how do I use 1 ounce of gold for a day-to-day transaction?
Yeah,
That's
it's a little much. Yeah,
it
you're
is.
not going out to eat with your $1,900 gold piece.
No, no. But with goldbacks, you can actually have fractional gold, and this is real gold. It is fractional gold that is in small amounts that is easy to carry. You can carry it in any kind of wallet. Um, I think that this is one of the most brilliant things to hit the market of precious metals, maybe in forever. Um, and again, it's a product of modern manufacturing. It is almost impossible to uh, uh, counterfeit these things because there's safeguards. There's a QR code that's going into the design of it starting next year. Very much like how American money, our bills have certain safeguards that are superimposed on them. These do too. They're genuine, and there is a small spot price increase over other forms of gold when you're buying it. But but you can buy a small amount of gold. This is affordable to literally anybody out there. This is also really good when we talk about maybe we're buying things that we don't necessarily want Uncle Sam knowing that we're buying in all cases, right? We want to maintain a certain level of privacy in our day-to-day lives, a certain level of security. Um, Maybe we want to pay people under the table, and cash right now is the way traditionally we've been doing that.
And of
But the
course,
Federal
they
Reserve
want to get rid of
in
that.
our own
That's
government,
right.
they're saying that there's a war on cash. They want us
Yep.
to go to a cashless society. I think that gold backs is a very viable alternative to the cash system. Do I think that it's going to replace it? No. No, I don't think that it will do that. But it is at least a way to answer it and to provide an alternative to it. The state of Utah, state of Wyoming, Nevada, New Hampshire, and South Dakota. I understand that South Dakota is going to be the next one to have their own gold-back system where they accept gold-back in lieu of or as a parallel currency to the U.S. dollar. And that's a very, very good thing to see. And I think this is an awesome product. I invest in it personally. I use it, and people have if they would rather pay for a class or would rather pay for some of the goods that I have to sell, utilizing gold backs or any other precious metal, I absolutely allow them to do so.
I see sort of two systems being created simultaneously. Obviously, there's going to be the Federal Reserve banking system, whatever that's going to entail, whether it be the CB, the centralized bank digital currencies, or continuing with the Federal Reserve notes. But I also see what you're talking about, which is this sort of parallel community-based economy that's probably going to be very local, people that you know, people that you trust. That they're going to be required. They're going to be demanding real money, not the debt instrument. So I think you're going to almost have to have two systems going. I think you're going to have the system where whereby you pay your mortgage to the big bank, okay, through the Federal Reserve system. But at the same time, you walk out your front door and you have your gold backs or whatever system that you're using. And you're conducting local commerce within your community, utilizing real money. And I also think people need to start developing this second community-based real money system, real economy, and getting familiar with it, just kind of understanding the difference between it and the other present economy that we're all used to, utilizing the Federal Reserve notes. And trying to get as much of their assets as they possibly can into a real system, and investing in things that actually provide you wealth. It might not be the BMW, okay? It might be a way for you to make money. Maybe a hobby that you have, something that you enjoy doing. Maybe you need to turn that into a business. Figure out how to monetize it, figuring out other ways where you can bring in real value to your home and real wealth, so you don't go down with the FRN ship. I do believe this. I think we're starting to see the Federal Reserve system starting to implode upon itself. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think so. I absolutely agree with the statement that the Federal Reserve System is beginning to implode on itself, and they are in trouble, and they're beginning to recognize that you can't be in the level of debt that they're in, and a lot of that debt is hinged upon the full faith and credit of the United States government. Well, the problem that we have with all that is that the United States government's been doing a really good job of making enemies of former allies that we require to be friendly to us going forward, like Saudi Arabia, for example. And so when we look at some of the headlines coming out today of Saudi Arabia now in talks with Iran, and they're agreeing to a ceasefire in Yemen, this is huge. And Iran is coming to the table and saying, we're going to stop arming the Houthi rebels tentatively. Now, we'll see if that they actually hold true to that. I don't think that they will. But the fact that they are at least at the table with one another, and that deal was not brokered by the United States. That deal was brokered by the Chinese. And that gives way to BRICS, the BRICS economic system, which a lot of people who are very intelligent and know what they're talking about when it comes to world finance. However, those same people have been dismissive of the danger that BRICS poses to the Bretton Woods banking system, to the Federal Reserve, and to the hegemony of the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency. And when you have the Saudi Arabians, because Saudi Aramco is a big part of why the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. When you take that into account, that they are approaching their most hated enemy in the entire world ideologically, Iranians, and saying, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna kind of cool the rhetoric down. You guys cool the rhetoric down, and we're willing to come to the bargaining table." And the United States is not the ones who are responsible for that happening. We're in a lot of trouble. That's something that people really need to look at soberly and say, "Hey, what in the world is going on here?" Because if these two, who absolutely hate each other, Sunnis and Shias, absolutely hate one another on a very visceral level, and when they're willing to come to the table outside of the influence of the United States, we have to sit back. Our policymakers need to sit back and say, "Wait, what are we doing wrong here?" And you need to recognize that this is putting the United States, our economy, our foreign policy, everything in a serious amount of jeopardy. And so people really need to be paying attention to this stuff closely and get ready, because I think that if such a day comes, and there are certainly powers in the world that want this to be, the Russians want it to happen, the Chinese want it to happen. It's a stated goal of BRICS, the BRICS economic system, to destabilize the U.S. dollar. They don't want to just create a parallel currency. They want the U.S. dollar gone. Because they understand that our economy is the source of our power as a nation, and they're working very diligently to get rid of it. So it's not even going to matter at that point if these banks are too big to fail, quote unquote, whether they are, whether they aren't. That one is going to hit everybody when that happens. And when it does, we're going to begin to look like Venezuela very, very quickly, because everything is leveraged around debt. And to be fair, according to some out there, and they're not wrong, who are talking about credit card debt and the levels of credit card debt that we have, that may happen if the credit card debt bubble pops. And there are some people that are speculating that it will, that it could happen potentially very soon. We'll see. I'm not experienced enough necessarily to comment on that, but I can just tell you what they're saying. They think that it will, and that all of these things, not to be a doomsayer, but all of these things are pointing out that people really need to be taking their finances much more seriously. And you need to have a sane amount invested in tangibles, a sane amount invested in ammunition. Don't go crazy with it. You don't necessarily need an entire ASP at your place, because that would be kind of crazy. Maybe, maybe not. But definitely maybe have a few more serviceable firearms. Maybe buy some enablers that you need. Maybe some radio equipment, night vision for sure. I don't think that there's any reason that any armed American out there should not have a good set of night vision, an IR laser, and get the training to use it. There's so many great trainers out there. I've told many people this over the past 12 months and really longer, but I've been saying it over and over again. The United States has never had a time where we had so many well-seasoned combat vets who are offering great training to Americans. And we've never had that before in history, where there's so many people that are doing that. I've got trainers just here in North Carolina that are reaching out to me on a fairly regular basis, saying, "Hey, let's get together, let's work on some stuff." And so there's so many good trainers at the local most level. People don't have to necessarily travel half the country away to get solid training on those fundamentals. And that money, the money that you have in your account is not doing you any good if you don't have the means to protect it. You don't have a strategy to protect it. You're not doing anything to take care of yourself, right? You can't eat the money. You need to be putting away, the entire strategy of putting away a certain amount of food, putting away a certain amount of means to protect it, getting the training, precious metals as a parallel currency, the parallel economy aspect of it. These are all things that are going to protect you, and I promise they are going to pay off. It's not something that I'm telling you to do just, as a tinfoil hat or anything like that. This is what I do. This is how I live. This is what I've been doing for a long period of time. And because, I saw the writing on the wall a long time ago. And just like you talked about coming into this, was a lot of the greatest generation, the depression generation, they didn't trust the banking system. And I grew up paying very careful attention to watching what my grandparents did and said, that's pretty smart. There's a certain amount of money you should keep in a bank, but you need to protect yourself as well.
That's fantastic. I've been quiet the majority of the time, but just kind of taking it in and soaking it in. And what I'm hearing is it's a call for economic sovereignty. It's a wake up call to kind of see what's going on, and so you can just put this in your tool bag. Just another skill set to for somebody like me. I'm not really monetarily inclined, as my friends know. I'm more like a spendthrift. But yeah, definitely, I've been taking this in. I appreciate the amount of thought you put into that.
Hey, NC Scout, before we close her down today, how do people reach you? How do people get in contact with you and all the great training that you got offered?
So they can follow the site, AmericanPartisan.org, which is a daily news aggregator. There's original content up there as well. Brushbeater.org, which is my original site. Radio Contra, which is a podcast. And just a lot of great interviews. Just had another interview with a private intelligence professional that we did yesterday that went out this morning. You can follow me on Twitter as well. My handle is NC Scout, and that is at Brushbeater. And got a couple of books out there now. Have The Gorilla's Guide to the Baofeng Radio, which is a bestseller on Amazon. And I also have the Guerrilla Dispatch Volume 1, which is a collection of articles that I've written over the years, going back to 2015, as well as a number of articles from my other contributors. And we're going to have Volume 2 that's going to be coming out early next month. So you can look for all of those on Amazon, as well as my web store, which is brand new. It's brushbeater.store. There's a lot of logo gear, T-shirts, patches, all the cool guy stuff that everybody asks for. It's all over there.
Fantastic, sir. Hey, thanks for coming on once again. God bless you, sir.
Thank y'all. God bless y'all too.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Pinelander podcast. If you enjoy our unique content, please consider supporting our sponsors. SOF News, providing special operations news from around the world. It's where Paul and I go to keep abreast of what's going on within the SOF community. Check them out at sof.news. Blacksmith Publishing, been serving the warrior class since 2013. They have great titles written for warriors, by warriors. If you're looking for excellent reference material or just want to unwind with a great novel, be sure to check out the bookstore located at blacksmithpublishing.com. And if you're looking for some cool Pinelander apparel, head on over to the general store located at pinelandergeneralstore.com. That's all one word, pinelandergeneralstore.com. Have a great selection of shirts, hats, jackets, sweaters, stickers, patches, artwork, and a whole lot more. Check out the store at pinelandergeneralstore.com. If you're interested in helping develop our country's next generation of warriors, please consider donating to the American Agoge Project. The mission of the project is to foster an environment producing able-bodied citizen warrior men of fine character. And we'll be officially launching the project in 2023 in celebration of Blacksmith Publishing's 10th anniversary. Until our next meeting, stay mentally and tactically smart, physically and spiritually strong, and socially astute. To each other we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. May God continue to bless Pineland.